What is up, you guys? I hope you're doing well. I'm Tony Fuentes. Welcome back to the Edit Like series. So in this case, we're going to edit a profile which I'm very fond of, which is Benj Villena's profile on Instagram. Now, Benji or Benny is a photographer from Manila, Philippines, and his style is very cinematic, very warm, and it's very stylish. So if you're new to the Edit Like series, the first thing that we want to do is jump into Instagram, check out his style, break it down, see all the things that we want to achieve on Lightroom to create a preset, and they apply it to different scenarios, different photographs to see how it performs. But if you want to jump all this and you want to skip it, remember that this preset that we're going to create is in the Edit Like preset pack, which will be linked down below, along with the presets from Alan Palander, Peter McKinnon, Monaris, Pau Claver, all the profiles that we've analyzed in this Edit Like series. So that's a way you can support me, but still you can achieve some very nice looks. So let's jump into Instagram and analyze his style. So this is Benj Villena's profile on Instagram. Remember to go and follow him if you like his style, and also you can buy his LUTs and his presets if you want to support him and achieve his precise look. So first of all, he shoots his photographs with a Sony a7 III or a Sony a7C, and he uses basically only prime lenses. He uses everything from a 24 to a 50 to an 85 to a 35 to a 105, all of them with fast apertures, whether it be 1.4 or 1.2 apertures. In that way, he can achieve a very shallow depth of field and very nice subject isolation with buttery smooth out of focus backgrounds, guys. So for example, here we can see background is completely obliterated, completely smooth. Over here, once again, in this one, the cup is what's in focus, the ridge of the cup over here, and the background, the subject is completely isolated and this has completely disappeared. Once again, very nice background blur. So that style, you can achieve it with fast aperture lenses. Now let's jump into his style. Now the style that we want to break down, guys, as you can see, everything is very cinematic. For example, in this images, how to achieve a very cinematic look is basically by reducing the overall overexposure and the underexposure on your image. So for example, by bringing down the highlights and the whites all the way to the negatives, we can achieve more information in the sky and in the building over here. But by bringing up the blacks and the shadows, we can achieve more information in these parts of the image, which would normally be very underexposed straight out from camera. Over here in the book stands, everything would be completely black and very contrasty. So in this way, we can achieve a very flat style, mimicking the style from cinema cameras or professional grade cameras. Now in this set, we can see it's a very greenish teal color look to the overall palette in the image. It's a very nice greenish tone over in the highlights over here. And also we can see that the blues are turning towards that teal aqua color. Now down here, we can see that the reds are turning towards an orangey tone. That's done in the camera calibration. So more on that further along, guys. So he shoots a lot of things, guys, everything from portraits, from random scenes in the subway or in the urban scene, and also some product photography. But what we want to achieve is the style from his warmish tones. So here we have this image, for example. This is the style that we want to achieve, which is a very yellowish tone, very warmish tone, but it's very cinematic as well. So he has that very nice exposure, very nice dynamic range that we talked about earlier, but adding some very nice hints with the color. For example, over here, it's very slight, very subtle, but we can see that greenish tone in the highlights, in the highlight roll of the image. And then we jump into the nitty-gritty of the color grading. This bike in the background is not orange, guys, it's red. This is desaturated and turned towards the oranges, and then we can see the very nice teal color instead of the blues. Now Benji over here gives us a very nice hint into his style, how to break it down. First of all, the palette, the blacks are faded out, that's done in the tone curve. Then we have some teal color in the shadows, some greenish tone in the midtones, and then over here the warmish tones in the highlights are completely desaturated and altered towards this brownish earthy vibe. The blue in the background of the building is completely altered towards the teal colors and it's desaturated. Now the purples are gone and we're all left with the teal color over here. Now that's done in camera calibration. Now in camera calibration, when you reduce or take the blues all the way down to the teals, the opposite side of the spectrum, which is the oranges, really starts to pop up, and that's done in camera calibration. And here we can see it very apparent in the skin tones. Also, by adding a bit of green primer, we can achieve skin tones which are more rich with a bit of blushiness and a bit of reddish tones. So here we can see that the original skin tones were a bit flat, a bit normal, and over here they're very apparent to his style, very orangey and a bit more red in them. So that's the thing that we want to remember. But overall, I don't know if you can see this, guys, over on YouTube, but over here we can see those greenish tones everywhere in the highlights, particularly in this part, and also in the shadows. So those greenish tones in the highlights, we're going to achieve them in the color grading part, which was once the split toning. Keep scrolling down, and this is basically the style that we want to achieve. It kind of mimics the golden hour with this temperature, so it's very nicely exposed, very cinematic, especially when you cut it down in the 3:5 aspect ratio over here, 3 images horizontally, gives us this wide 21:9 aspect ratio, and then you add this warmish tone with the temperature, which adds to this golden hour effect or something like that. It's mimicking the style of a very warmish day. Remember, he's shooting in the Philippines, so he's maybe trying to translate the warmish vibe that he's receiving in the scene to the images. Also, it looks like it was a very nice sunny sunset in the golden hour. Again, he shoots all types of photographs, some portraits, which are more normal in the editing like process, and some nice product photography, but we want to really make emphasis on these warmish tones over here. Once again, these are quite exaggerated, they're a bit stylized, too stylized for my taste. The oranges are very prominent in all parts of the images, and in combination with the greenish tones, it gives us a strange vibe on a very cinematic, warmish like movie. It kind of reminds me of how Hollywood movies demonstrate the scenic styles of Cuba or Mexico City with very extreme warmish sepia like tones, when in reality, well, Mexico City, if you don't know Mexico City is quite cold, it rains a lot, it's very gray, it's nothing warm like they replicated on Hollywood movies. So that's the style that it kind of emanates, guys, a very warmish sepia like tone overall in the whole images. Now in this set we can see the before and after with the greenish tones. Now the greens in the original image are very contrasty, very vivid, and over here they're very desaturated, burned down, turned towards the oranges, and it's very a nice style, guys. But once again, those greenish tones overall in the image. So enough talking, guys, let's jump into Lightroom and apply all this analysis into a real photograph. So guys, once in Lightroom we have these images. Most of them are shot in a very random scenario, maybe people in the subway or maybe people just doing their jobs. So basically that's the style that we want to replicate, these images that he shoots when he goes out in Manila or in the Philippines in general, to accommodate his style and to make it a bit more cinematic in very normal scenarios. So let's start off by editing this one, guys. Okay guys, so the first thing that we want to do is replicate the style or the dynamic range from cinema cameras. So what we want to do, we have all the information in this raw image, we want to make it look like if it was a screenshot from a film. So for that, we're not going to move the white balancing yet. The overexposure and contrast, I like to leave them at 0. That will depend on each image. But in this case, what we want to do is bring down the highlights and the whites to have a bit more dynamic range in the brightest parts of the image. Now, if you don't know the difference between highlights and whites, well, basically the whites are the brightest parts of the image, then the middle tones are the highlights. The same applies for the shadows and the blacks. So we're going to pull down the highlights. I'm just going to pull them down all the way to maybe a +60, -63, something like that, guys, -65. Yeah, it's looking quite nice overall. We can, and then the whites, I'm just going to pull them down once again all the way down to a -90 or something like that. Now I'm pulling it all the way down, guys. Immediately we can see how the bright parts of the image are a bit more flat. Now we want to do the same but with the shadows. So I'm going to pull the shadows up, and immediately we can see how the image is a bit more bright and the darkest parts of the image have a bit more information, all the way down, all the way up, maybe to an 88, something like that, guys. Immediately the image is a lot more bright and we can see a lot more information in the blacks of the image. We can do the same with the blacks, maybe not too much, because otherwise the image is completely without any contrast. So maybe to half the way, maybe a 55%. Over here, before and after, immediately the image is looking a bit more flat. Now in presence, clarity and texture, we're not going to move them too much. Now if we add texture, we can see that the image is a bit more sharp, too much in my taste. Normally movies don't have a very sharp image. They're very nice, very high quality, high res, but they don't have any post sharpening. So what I want to do, clarity, we're not going to add contrast with the clarity. We're going to go with a -10 just to reduce a bit of the clarity and the sharpness and make it a bit more soft, guys. Now in saturation, I did mention that his style is very desaturated in some cases, but in this case we're just going to go a bit low with a -5. And then in HSL, we're going to desaturate precisely or individually each color. Okay, next up, the tone curve. Now in the tone curve, we want to achieve a bit of contrast. We lost a bit of contrast with the overall basic corrections and achieve those faded look in the blacks. So we're going to create a point in the shadows over here, point in the midtones, and a point in the highlights. Now here we can see that if we pull this button, which controls darker parts of the image up, how all the blacks and all the shadows start to fade away into that faded look. So we're not going to go too much over here. It's going to be perfect just to have a bit more of a faded look in the overall image. Then the shadows, just going to pull them down ever so slightly underneath the diagonal just to achieve a bit more contrast. And then the highlights, just pull them up just a bit, and the whites, pull them down, something like that, guys. Before and after, we click this button on off, we can see what we've done, and basically adding that base of his style, which is the faded look with the very flat looking image, but achieving a bit of contrast. Next, I'm not going to go to HSL right now, guys. I'm going to go all the way down to camera calibration to achieve that very style that he has. Now, we talked about the teal and orange look, so here we can see that the blues, we have them over here. If we change the blues towards the teal color, every color which is composed with a decent part of blues or any percentage of blues is going to be alterated. But particularly the blues are going to be alterated into this teal color. So I'm going to go maybe not too much. Over here we can see if we go to extreme, the jacket of the subject turns towards that teal color. I'm going to go not too harsh, around the 20s, something like that, guys. And then I'm just going to desaturate a bit of blue. Remember that we want to desaturate a bit of everything. Next up, the green primary and the red primary. Now remember that we want to bring out a lot of the reddish and orangish tones in the skin tones to make them a bit unnatural, but that's just his style, guys. So for that, I'm going to pull up the green primary just a bit, maybe to a 10, yeah, something like that, guys. And immediately, well, in this image we don't have a portrait or a front facing portrait, but the skin tones really start to pop up when we apply this. Now, talking about the red primary, what we want to do is change it towards the oranges, remember, guys. So I'm going to go not towards the purples, but towards the oranges just a bit, to a plus 20 something, maybe to a plus 25, and reduce a bit of the saturation. Now, if you don't know what camera calibration is, guys, it's basically altering the 3 basic colors which every single pixel on your image is composed of. So we're changing the green, the blue, and the red, the RGBs. So basically every color in the image that we can see in our screens is composed of those 3 colors. By altering the blues towards a teal color, we're basically altering every single color in the image which is composed with a bit of blue. So just a little heads up on what we're doing with camera calibration. So it's a way you can achieve a very stylized look, but also you're changing the nature of the image in general, guys. So many photographers don't like to mess with it. So, okay, so we have a flat looking color with a faded blacks and with the base color. Now we're going to go to HSL and really pin down all those colors that he has in his style. So first of all, in hue, what we want to do is change the oranges or the reddish towards the oranges. Just pull them up just a bit. Remember that bike that we had in the example was a bit too orange, nothing like red. Just put them up all the way down to maybe a 25 is a nice, or 30. Then the oranges, we don't want them towards the yellowish tones, we want them towards the reddish tones. So just pull them down ever so slightly towards the reds. Yellows, now yellows, we don't want them towards the greens. You can see this tree in the background, if we pull it down towards the greens, it becomes very fluorescent. We want it towards the oranges once again to a minus 50. I'm happy with that, changing it up to that really nice yellowish tone. Then the greens, we don't want towards the emeralds. If we pull them up towards the emeralds, everything is a bit more cold. We want it to be a bit more warm. So for that, we're going to go all the way down to the minus 100, where you can see the greens in the background just change from emerald to a very nice burned out green. Then aquas, we're just going to go to a plus 9, something like plus 10, towards a more mintish tone over here. And the blue is just going to do the same towards the aquas. Now, purples and magentas, remember that we don't want them in our image. So in saturation, we're going to pull them down all the way down to a minus 100. So we don't have any trace of magentas or purple on our image. And then all the other colors, I'm just going to desaturate them with exception from the reds. I'm not going to touch the reds because that will control the skin tones. And we also already desaturate them in camera calibration. And then the oranges, it's going to pull them up just a bit, just to make emphasis on the skin tones. Remember that the skin tones normally are in the orange range. So I'm just going to put plus 5. And everything else, I'm just going to go with a minus 25 just to desaturate just a bit. And if we click this button on and off, we can see what we've done. And everything is looking a bit more towards his style, guys. Now we still have to add that golden vibe with the temperature, but that's going to be done in the end. Finally, in luminance, guys, what we want to do is just bring down a bit of the greens. Just bring them down ever so slightly. A bit of the blues as well for the sky. Just bring them down. And the aquas, just like that, guys. And basically, that's done with the HSL. Now we're going to jump into the color grading. Now in color grading, well, this was previously known as split toning, but now we have also the midtones, so it's called color grading. So what we want to do is just achieve a very nice look. For example, for the shadows, we want to achieve a look that has a very nice teal color. So for that, I'm just going to scroll around and maybe go with a very nice teal color over here. And the saturation, well, we can move it over here. I'm just going to type it in. It's just going to be very subtle, guys, with a 5%. Now, if we pull it up too much, guys, when we use this preset on dark images, everything is going to be in the threshold of the shadow. So everything is going to be very in teal color, so this color will be very dominant. So to compensate that, I'm just going to put it down to a 5%. Now the midtones, we want them to be a bit warm, so I'm going to go over here with a color over here in the oranges, just like that, guys. Add again just a little saturation, maybe a 7 or a 5%, and then in the highlights we're going to add that greenish tone that we had in the skies, guys. So for that, I'm going to go over here, just pull it up towards a greenish tone, very nice greenish tone over here, and the saturation just going to go with 24%. And now if you click this button on and off, we can see that the changes are very subtle, guys, but they're basically there. We can see that greenish vibe taking over, and it's going to be a bit more apparent in other images. Now, other than that, we're basically finished, guys. Remember, detail, well, I don't want any sharpening, just going to pull it down, and basically that's about it, guys. We still have to add that really warmish tone. So for that, first of all, I'm just going to save the preset, just going to go to create a preset over here in the palette, just name it, and remember that white balancing, exposure, and contrast, we don't want to check mark them, that will depend on each image. So I'm going to create it, and now we have a very cinematic look, but still it doesn't have that warmish tone. So for that, just going to pull up the temperature. Here we can see that the image is starting to look a bit more warm, and just pull on the tint towards the greenish to achieve a bit more greenish tones. Now another thing that we can do is in camera calibration, just add a bit more greenish tint into the shadows, maybe over here. Yeah, something like that, guys. And this image is looking very nice, very cinematic, and resembling that warmish tone that Benj Villena does. Add a bit more temperature, just like that. Yeah, it's looking quite nice. Now let's see how this preset performs on other images. Okay, so we have this image. As we can see, it's very contrasty. It's a very moody day. Let's apply the preset. Immediately we can see that everything is a bit more exposed, very flat, and again we can see those very nice teal colors over here. So let's pull up the temperature to make it a bit more warm, bit of the tint all the way down, and maybe in this case just pull down the exposure just a bit and add a bit more contrast, and it's looking quite nice, guys. Now I have this portrait once again. This one is very overexposed over here and underexposed in the shadows. Let's see how the preset performs. Makes the image a lot more flat. It's looking quite nice. Now pull down a bit of the exposure, add a bit of contrast just to compensate the bad photograph that I took on field. And now I'm going to apply a lot more warmish tones over here, a bit of greenish tones with the tint. Pull down a bit of exposure once again, and it's looking quite nice. This portrait of the man just staring at me because I took a photo of him, not very nice. Let's apply the preset. Immediately it looks very cinematic, very nice skin tones. Here we can see immediately how the skin tones are a bit more lush, a bit more orangey. You can see some reddish and purplish tones popping up. That's quite nice. Now let's make it a lot more warm, pulling out the temperature, putting down a bit of the tint, and adding a bit contrast, just like that, guys. It's looking quite nice. Yeah. Now maybe if you want a more cinematic look, you can always crop it. For example, I want to crop it to 21:9 aspect ratio over here. Yeah, and it's looking fantastic, guys, like a screenshot from a thriller movie in the subway, an action scene. Another image, these chefs cooking up a very nice meal. Once we apply the preset, we can see that the changes that we've done are very apparent. For example, here in the highlights, here we have that greenish tone that we had in the sky and in the highlight roll of his images. Then the skin tones are those orangey skin tones that he likes. I'm not particularly fond of them. And then we have that teal color overall in the image. So in this case, how would I correct this image? Pull down a bit of the exposure. It's a bit too overexposed, just like that, guys. And then if I want the image to be a bit more vibrant, a bit more like a golden hour, just pull up a bit of contrast, and the temperature, just put it up, pull the greens down just a bit in the tint. Then we have this very stylized look that he likes. Let's do one more. In this one, very bad photograph with a very fast shutter speed. So let's apply a preset. Then just going to correct that by pulling up a bit of the exposure. And in this case, just pull up a bit of the temperature. Yeah, and with that, I'm quite happy. So this preset achieves a very cinematic look. But then if we want to achieve that very warmish and very golden hour like look that he has, just pull up a bit of the temperature and pull down the tint. So guys, that's my interpretation on Benj Villena's color grading. Remember that the preset that we've just created, I've added it to the Edlight preset pack, which will be linked down below with the presets from Alan Palander, Peter McKinnon, Garrett King, all those famous photographers that we've analyzed in this series. Just a little disclaimer guys, I'm not taking any authority on his style. The purpose of these tutorials guys is for you guys to achieve a better understanding of how to break down a style and how to achieve certain looks on Lightroom on post edition, so you can achieve better understanding on how post edition and editing works. So that's about it guys. If you want to support me, go ahead and like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe, all those things. I'm Tony Fuentes, hope you're doing well. Cheers to all of you, see you in the next one.